So now we're going to actually look at designing the functionality of the app. So we're going to base our design on what we did on iOS. So it's pretty much going to be exactly the same design. There's just going to be a little difference in that we have to initialize the input fields, initialize a button, and the text view. And I'll explain more about what I mean by that in the video itself. So we're going to create the skeleton for the methods, we're going to initialize these input values, and we're going to talk about how the code will flow from method to method. In this part of our tutorial, we are going to design some button handlers and write out the outline for our methods. So we're just going to design the skeleton of the code without actually implementing the methods. This will get you used to the control flow and what methods will call what methods and exactly how our app is going to work. So right now I'm in main.axml, and again this is Android, the Android portion of this tutorial. So this is what our app is going to look like right now. We have again the 4 text inputs, our button, which will perform the calculations, and the print function, and we're going to have the output here being the final investment value. So we have, if we check each one, we have IDs. So in the iOS portion, we didn't have IDs, we just had a name. This time we have an ID, and I'm going to show you why that's important. So the difference between, one of the main differences between Android and iOS is that we have to initialize the fields that we create here. So if we add a text field or a button or a text view, we have to initialize it in the main activity.cs. Whereas in iOS, we could kind of just call the name. We have to initialize it here. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this int count because we won't need it. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by declaring some variables up here so that we can use them throughout the code and not just in one function. So I'll explain what I'm doing as I go. It's going to be edit text, and this is going to be principal investment. And I'll just create one of these for each of the variables. This is going to be interest. In fact, this is going to be principal investment text, I'm going to say. It's going to be interest text. It's going to be, in fact, let's have this interest rate. That's more appropriate. And this is going to be, we have principal investment interest rate. This is going to be compounds per year text. And we'll have one more that is this one is just going to be the time years invested. So what I'm doing here is I'm just declaring some variables, and these are the type. So if we go back to main.axml and we click on the document outline, okay, notice that we have our fields. So we have the 4 text inputs, the button, and the text output. And this shows you the type. So each of these text inputs are of type edit text, the button is of type button, and the text output is of type text view. So that corresponds with, if we go back to here, that corresponds with the type. So these are of type edit text, and the button that we have, what did we call this, a calculate button, is of type button. And finally the label or the text view, which we will call final investment, is going to be of type text view. So think of these as variables. For example, we're declaring an integer. It's going to be maybe integer I. It's I of type int, just like this is principal investment text of type edit text. Okay, so now we've declared the type. It's time to initialize them down here. If we take a look at this line, this is kind of, in fact, this is almost exactly what we'll want. We'll modify it a little bit, but basically what we'll do is we will take each variable. I want to get rid of this because we don't need that. We'll start with principal investment text, and we're going to say it's equal to find view by ID. So this basically finds each of these 6 different fields. It finds them by the ID, so we first have to enter the type, This is of type edit text. And then we say resource because we're going to find these based on the resource, and then ID, and then this is going to be, we have here a nice list of the possible options, and this one's going to be the TXT principal investment. Alright, so what this is doing is it's finding this view by ID. It's of type edit text, so it's basically is going to find the particular field by the type, which is edit text, and then it's going to go more specific and it's going to search resources, and it's going to search IDs, and then it's going to search for this ID. And we know that's the one that corresponds with this because we assigned it here when we said the ID is TXT principal investment. Okay, just like the ID of the interest one is TXT interest rate, this is the ID of this one, TXT number of times compounded. The button has this ID, button calculate, and this is TXT final investment. So those are the IDs, and those are the ones we'll need to call. So we'll do the same thing for the rest of these. So interest rate text is find view by ID, and this is going to be of type edit text also. It's going to be resource, ID, and this one's going to be TXT interest rate text. And Xamarin's pretty smart about predicting which one you're going to choose, so you can usually just select them quickly from the drop-down menu that appears. So this one's going to be compounds per year, this one's going to be find view by ID, and this one's also an edit text. And we're going to search again through resources, and we're going to search the ID field, and we're going to search TXT. This one's going to be number times compounded. And the last edit text is going to be the years invested text. Again, find view by ID. This is of type edit text. And once more we'll search resources by ID, and this one's going to be TXT years invested. Okay, so now we've initialized the edit texts. Let's initialize the button. So this one's going to be calculate button. And we're going to do very similar things, so find view by ID. This time it's a button and not an edit text. So we'll just select button there. And we'll do resources again, ID, and this one is BTN calculate. Because again, this is the ID of our button. Okay, and last but not least, we'll do the final investment. And that's going to be find view by ID. And that's going to be a text view this time. So say a text view, not an edit text. And we're going to do resource.id. This one's going to be TXT final investment. Alright, so I know it seems complicated, but this is basically just saying that this variable, for example, principal investment text, is going to hold whatever text input we put into the TXT principal investment. So every time this variable is called, we know that we're looking for whatever's in the TXT principal investment field, which will be this one. So it's just doing that for each of the variables, and this is a little bit of an annoying step, but it's just something that we have to do in Android versus in iOS. Alright, so now we no longer need this line because we're not dealing with my button, so we can get rid of that. And this line just has the button handler, so when the button's clicked, we get this happening. Okay, except that we want this first of all in a different method, and it's also not being called on button. It's going to be called on the calculate button, which is ours. So let's go ahead and make a method to handle this. We'll call this click button, and it's basically just going to contain the button handler. We'll just select this and cut it, and we'll call, in fact, let's first change this up a bit. So we'll do that, and we'll do that. So we have it all nicely set up. And we don't want this anymore because that's just doing something we don't want it to. And now we're going to call click button in here, so that when this function runs, when this onCreate function runs, it initializes all of these variables and then calls click button. Now, just like we had before in iOS, we're going to use the same kind of method control flow. So this is going to call some kind of a function that will be the calculate function. So it's going to be calculate final investment. And it's going to be another void, and this is where our calculation is going to go. So we'll call it in here, calculate final investment. Okay, and then just like before, the calculate final investment is going to do its calculation, and then it's going to call some kind of a print function. And that's going to perform the actual printing. So if we call the print function here, okay, good. So this is our skeleton all set up, very similar to in iOS, but with this extra step here. However, it doesn't have the button handler, so that's a plus. There's definitely trade-offs to doing it in either way. So we've initialized our fields. We're calling click button, which is going to call calculate final investment, which is going to call the print function, and then that's going to print. So next time we'll actually look at implementing some of these. In this part of our tutorial, we design the functionality of the app. So we've already done the layout, now we finish the functionality. So we did this by creating a skeleton that encompassed the layout of the app and included the flow of methods, but we didn't actually implement these methods. So this part was just to get you comfortable with how one method is going to call the next, which will call the next, and so on and so forth. So by now, you should be able to design the basic functionality of a small app in both iOS and Android, and you don't have to implement it yet. We'll talk about that next time.